please welcome the CEO of Podium, Mr. Eric Ray.
Hey everyone, I am so pleased today to be interviewing a literal pioneer of technology, the internet, and that's technology in both the Bay Area and Utah. He invented the PDF. He's the founder of Adobe, and his name's John Warnock, and I want to give him a warm welcome. Let's give him a warm welcome, everyone. Okay, John, thank you for being here. You live up in Deer Valley in the winter, right?
In the winter.
Okay, so
yes.
it wasn't too far of a drive down here.
No, it was great.
Okay, awesome. So, like many people in this audience today, I only remember Utah tech, and actually just tech in general, back to like the WordPerfect and Novell days. Because I'm 33. I think you graduated with your first degree when 20 years before I was born, but you actually know the origins of Utah Tech, and you were part of it. And
yes.
Actually, we're probably doing a disservice. It's not just Utah Tech. It was the internet in general. Tell us about that.
I'm going to tell you some things you don't know. This is deep history of the tech industry in general. In the early 1960s, the government did one of the best things that it's ever done. The Russians had just launched the first satellite into space in the late 50s. And that was a wake-up call to the United States. And so Robert McNamara, who was head of Secretary of Defense, said, we need to find out everything there is to know about computers. And so they founded a program called ARPA, which stood for Advanced Research Projects Agency. And they said, the way we're going to do this is very different than all other research funding. What we're going to do is we're going to build 12 centers of excellence, and we're going to heavily fund those centers of excellence to explore the various aspects of computing. So MIT, University of Utah, University of Illinois, Berkeley, UCLA, Carnegie Mellon, all of these universities were given very large grants to study certain aspects of computing. The University of Utah attracted David Evans, and he started an area of exploration called man-machine interaction. Now, the cool thing was that the Department of Defense did these research grants, and none of it was classified. As a matter of fact, they encouraged people to cross-pollinate and work with each other.
So was this like the first version of open source?
Well, it was sort of like that. These people were sort of the best in their field, and they attracted the best students in their field. And so MIT, for instance, worked on operating systems. Carnegie Mellon worked on programming languages. Stanford worked on artificial intelligence. All of these people worked together. So I think in 1968, all of the lead investigators came together at Alta, Utah, in the Rustler Lodge, and I was a graduate student at that time, and they invited me to come to this meeting of all the best computer scientists in the world. And at that meeting, they approved the communication network that was going to connect all of these centers together, and that was the ARPANET, which is now the internet.
So you were at the first meeting of the internet.
Yes.
Not bad.
Not bad. The internet's turned out okay.
It's been good. I like it.
Yes. So anyway, what happened was that in the late 60s, they decided to sort of switch the focus of the ARPA community to defense-oriented research. And most of the researchers really weren't interested in defense research because it was classified and all of that. And the head of the information processing branch guy was named Bob Taylor, and he moved to Utah from Washington, D.C. So he was in charge of administering all of these researchers. And so he moved to Utah, stayed here for a year, but then he went down and he contacted the head of Xerox. And he said, why don't we build a research facility for Xerox in Palo Alto? And they said, they were a very, very successful company at that time. They were selling lots and lots of copiers. They said, great, we'll do that. So he knew where all the graduate students were across the country, and so he knew where to go get the best computer scientists. So he did that.
And you were included in that group,
Not
right?
yet.
Oh.
Not yet. So PARC was established in around 1970. I joined PARC in 1978, and when I walked in the doors of PARC, every secretary, every researcher, and every manager had a personal computer. It had a screen the size of a page, it had a mouse, it had a graphical user interface with Windows, and this was 3 years before the IBM PC was announced. So this was before any commercial PCs. Every computer was interconnected with Ethernet. Every computer had access to file servers. Every computer had access to laser printers that were invented at PARC. So walking into PARC at that time was like looking into the future. I mean, it was absolutely astounding. My kids would come and play video games between computers over the network. And this was in 1978. So, in 1979, Apple was about to go public. And Xerox wanted to invest in Apple. And Steve Jobs said, no, you can't invest in Apple. And they said, well, what would we need to do so you would allow us to invest in Apple? He said, I'll let you invest in Apple if you allow me to tour PARC. So Steve Jobs, on December 2nd, 1979, made a tour of PARC, and it blew him away. He saw things, he, like me, it was like looking into the future. He saw all these computers interconnected, all of them talking to each other. He saw text editors, he saw email systems, he saw engineering drawing programs, all kinds of applications. He immediately hired people out of PARC. He was working on the Lisa at the time, and immediately hired people from PARC and started working on the Macintosh. The Macintosh was Steve's version of the Alto, which was the computer that was at PARC. The Alto had a screen that only had 1 bit per pixel, so it was just black or white, and they could do pages and they could print on laser writers. But even at PARC, they were starting to think about using color machines with variable resolution and printers, color printers with variable resolution. And so they hired me to make the graphics model for all of the variety of displays and printers and anything that moves, so to speak. And Chuck Geschke and I, he had a thing called the Imaging Sciences Laboratory, and we sort of had the state-of-the-art computers, and we figured out how to drive all of these things. Then around, and we were trying to get this to be useful for Xerox Corporation, but it became very evident that Xerox was never going to be able to enter the computer business. They just simply didn't understand it, yet they had the best research facility in the country. So in 1982, we said, look, all of this technology is never going to see the light of day unless we do something about it. And so we decided to leave and start Adobe. It's been a good ride.
I think that's the understatement of the entire conference.
We started out with so 3 months after we started, Steve Jobs said, I hear you guys are doing good things. So he came over to visit, and he saw what we were doing. Now, if you think about the Macintosh, Steve had a real problem. He had this screen with a bitmap. The first Macintosh had a bitmap display, but the only printer that sort of could deal with that was a wire matrix printer, and Steve knew that businesses would never put up with a wire matrix printer. So he saw what we were doing with laser printers, and the early Canon machine was about to come out. And he said, gee, guys, let me buy your company. And we said no. We said, we're too early in this process to do that. He said, well, here's the deal. Why don't we build a printer together? And why don't I give you an advance on royalties? And why don't I buy 20% of your company? We said, okay, that'll work. And so we built the laser writer over the next year, but in parallel, we built printers for typesetters. We built printers for almost everybody who was building printers. And so PostScript was an incredibly profitable first product. It carried us through so that we could start building applications in 1987. In 1986, PostScript became a standard. In 1987, we introduced Illustrator. In 1989, we bought Photoshop. In 1992, we brought out Acrobat and PDF, and quite frankly, no one knew what it was good for. No one understood. They said, well, why would you want to send a bunch of files around networks?
It doesn't make much sense, honestly.
It doesn't make any sense at all. This was before the internet. The internet came along in 1994, so the big push after that, and then everybody sort of figured it out. I think Acrobat actually is the most used product in the world.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Guys, this is crazy. You basically, I am blown away. It's actually making me feel really small for this little thing called Podium that I do. But this is great. So then you acquired a bunch of companies, and what else?
So one really big event happened in 1989, and Steve had been moved out of Apple. John Sculley was running Apple, and John Louis Gadsay was running the technical portion.
Dark times.
Yes, well, and Microsoft teamed up with Apple, and they got up on stage at a Siebel conference, and they say, we're going to put Adobe out of business. So they ganged up on us.
Apple and Microsoft.
And this was sort of traumatic at the time because Apple and Microsoft were, but they literally on stage said they were going to put us out of business. Okay.
It's not very nice.
So I went back to our engineers, and I really, forgive me for the language, but I said, guys, we're going to out-invent the bastards. And the engineers, came up to the challenge, and they did. And we came out with things like ATM, and we came out with all kinds of things. And Microsoft, as far as I know, never shipped a printer. They never, had any competing software. Now, Microsoft also was a beneficiary of PARC, because Charles Simonyi wrote a text editor called Bravo at PARC, and that was the text editor that everybody used. And then he went to work for Microsoft, and he wrote Microsoft Word. So Microsoft Word was a derivative of Bravo that was done at PARC. And there are a lot of people who have split out from PARC, and a lot of companies that have been formed, so all the networking companies and all of that kinds of things. But all of those came from ARPA. And all of the talent, and really it was the government's challenge to sort of understand everything about computers that made all of that happen.
So the government has done a couple decent things, just
Yes.
not lately.
Surprising.
Yes. This is news to me, even.
Yes.
That is amazing. That is honestly incredible. So we've got maybe 10,000 people here at various different stages of building a business or wanting to start a business. I think you probably have some pretty good advice.
Yeah, yes. My partner, Chuck Geschke, has one piece of advice for everybody starting a business. Build a business that you would like to work for. In other words, the way you treat your employees is incredibly important. And the way you keep transparency, the way you keep openness, the way you sort of respect everybody and have communication is really important. I think the other thing Chuck always said was always hire people that are smarter than you are. And in the technology business, that's really, really important. You have to let people create. You have to invent all the time. You always have to make the products better. You always have to make them easier to use. At Adobe, we build architecture so that we only write one piece of code, and we make it so the architecture works on all platforms. So essentially in Illustrator and Photoshop, it's one piece of code, but it happens to work on Windows, it happens to work on Macs. And we've architected all of our stuff so that we leverage its transportability across various platforms. And that's really been important. And it's also important on devices. If you make a website, you make it work on phones, you make it work on tablets, you make it work on anything, but you don't write multiple copies of everything. You write one copy and then make an architecture that works. Adobe was, of the technology companies, we were voted the, I think, second best company to work for. And I'm very proud of that. But the tech business is great. The other advice that I would give is you're going into an environment and an ecosystem that is enormously complex. What venture capitalists will make you do is write a business plan as though you're a self-contained company, that you have marketing, distribution, manufacturing, all that crap. That's very rarely the way it turns out. The technology business is a business of partnerships. And find people who you can work with and distributors who you can work with, and how people that can help you take your talent and make the whole ecosystem grow. The hardest thing is to try to be a standalone company that does everything. That's my advice.
Awesome. Awesome. And I want to make an important note here. So out of all the advice you've given, it wasn't about sales. It wasn't about marketing. It was all about innovation and product. And I think that is something that is needed. That's a message that's needed everywhere, but especially here in Utah. So I really appreciate that. I think it's spot on.
And you have a great culture. You have a great environment. And the technology business in Utah is growing great. It's a good environment. You have very talented people. Good luck.
What can we do in Utah to have even more innovation and even more success? Because we're still dwarfed by Silicon Valley. Maybe if Park would have started here, that could have helped. But
Yes. Well, I talk with the governor occasionally, and you really have to clean up the atmosphere. You really, he asked me what he can do, and I say, look, drawing people to come from outside Utah into the Salt Lake Valley or down to Provo or Lehigh or wherever, you have an environment problem, and you really have to fix it. And I said, you've got everything else. You've got outdoors, you have activities, you have a great environment, but you're not paying attention to sort of the basic human health aspects, and you need to.
yeah, I couldn't agree more.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, put the lights up. We want to show Mr. Warnock a standing ovation.
Guys, give him a round of applause.
Warnock,
John,
thank you,
thank you so much.
Silicon Slopes
This is
stage.
fantastic.
Thank you, Eric Ray. Again, thank you, Mr. Warnock.